Alright, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in the inmendham. Yes, it's me. Back again. I thought I would extend on what I was talking about last week in terms of the idea of what does it mean to be a utilitarian. And that just led me to thinking about the whole subject of even the God subject, and the idea that the argument sort of needs to be made in some sort of order, and you have to find out what it is that motivates people before there's much point in talking about value, because it's the whole value landscape argument. I mean, if you think there's great value in knitting a quilt, and having little memories of your grandchildren, and little whatever thoughts in your little head, and you think those experiences are hugely valuable, and the part where your blood's coming out of your eyes and ears, and you're convulsing in a hospital bed, and those things are just minor inconveniences, blah blah blah, and that's how you add up the little bits, to do your calculation. And again, that sort of just goes to the point that that's all we are. The brain is just a calculator, and it does it all with all of these abstractions. It does it in kind of a fuzzy logic. Little personal experiences you have that are representations of something that exists in nature. I could have a picture of a tree weeping blood and say, well, that's sort of the icon I use for the story of evolution. And so, the weeping tree doesn't really say enough or say it all or anything like that, but you're just using it as some placeholder for a concept of, bad. You have a bad experience, you recognize that, 7.8 million other people had the same bad experience this year, and you just do the simple calculation that, oh, that's a lot of misery. You hear some number about how many people were killed in a war, and then you start thinking about all the people injured in the war, and all the people who were widowed in the war, and all the people who were, and it becomes a bigger and bigger scale, and something that's, hard to measure the weight of these things. I guess that's what you're trying to do, is weigh them. So that's probably a legitimate subject to talk about, is how to weigh the value of all we're really playing for is moments of conscious experience. Your life is a bunch of moments of conscious experience, and the idea is that some of them are not very negative, I would argue, relative to others. And the real line is which one you really call an absolute positive, that is, it's worth paying for, in terms of your own suffering, that you would pay to have it by enduring some misery. And the more complicated question of you would force somebody else to be miserable to have it. So, you're having your lovely barbecue and chomping on your, your barbecued, and there's a price paid for that you didn't pay. Not only the work of the farmer, not only the expense of it, the filth of it, but also the suffering that the animals who were being farmed had to experience. And the price, you're forcing that price to exist, and that has to go into the math. So the concept is that utilitarians are basically just saying, well, look, I'm reasonable and I'm an efficiencyist. So I'm just going to sit there and say that all I need is the numbers. Give me the numbers in and the numbers out. And, I'll just do the simple calculation that you made a profit or you made a loss. I'll say it's either worth it or it's not worth it. So it is just a fact that, you can think of the world, and that's a perfectly reasonable statement, I'd say, is to be pragmatic about the fact that it's just plus and minus value, and it doesn't matter whether the plus and minus value is going to be experienced today or whether it's going to be experienced tomorrow. And as soon as you can see that, you can see that, well, it doesn't matter whether it's the day after tomorrow either or the day after that. So the future is a semi-large place, okay, lots of days in the future, presumably. Who knows how many, but lots of them. And, today is only today. So it's pretty easy to make an argument that sometimes you can pay a very small price today and prevent a very big price tomorrow or the day after or the day after. So that becomes a key element of the conversation. And recognizing that the future is a bigger place than the present, and whatever numbers you're playing with, the numbers get very large in the future and they're very small in the present. So that's sort of the framework of what I was thinking, just as a response to the fact that there's just so many people who claim to be some kind of utilitarian, whether it's positive or negative. The idea of preventing the red numbers, the losses, or whether you're trying to maximize your profit. So it's whether you're saying, well, let's make as much profit as possible, or let's pay as low electric bill as possible. Let's have as low losses as possible. And I would argue that yes, both are viable as statements, but as applied to being alive and being on Earth as a conscious organism, that's where you get into what Benatar almost duplicitously described as the asymmetry, the fact that the goods are really just eliminations of, in most cases, a negative. Now, he doesn't put it that way, but that's essentially how you have an asymmetry. That's how you have a possibility of there being an imbalance in the goods and the bads, is that, yes, the goods are just made out of eliminating a bad. And there is no good that actually balances a bad. Now, some people might argue that, winning the lottery is worth a stub toe, But again, we're arguing prevention of a big, huge, giant bad, poverty. So, that sort of fails because, again, you're correcting some negative. You're not really getting a positive. So you have to really come up with some kind of real event that isn't separating you from a real threat, the threat of a disease or some sort of thing, some sort of immunity, where that's just eliminating a negative. And you can't call eliminating a negative a true positive. Don't want to beat that to death, but that's another really important part of having the conversation in a rational framework is understanding the difference between when you're just escaping a negative and when you're truly doing something of real value. Is there any such thing as a real dessert, a free good, and again, if it's, the point is it's probably not going to be free, and it's balancing the price you paid for it. So the satisfaction of your happy meal, has to come at this price, and you've got to sit there and figure out, is it really, did I need to be happy that way, or could I have been made happy another way? All I did was satisfy hunger. So could have I satisfied my desire, my hunger, in some manner that didn't cause something to be hurt to do it? And that's the simple utilitarian strategy, is just to recognize, to find the shortest line between your needs and your desires and their gratification and satisfying them at the minimal cost. to take out any imposition, which is another big giant word, in the subject, because again, part of the argument, I think a pretty strong, hard part of the argument is you're cheating when you don't have to feel something else's pain, and you can pretend it away. You can not have to acknowledge it because you didn't have to pay the price. And it's really easy to say something's cheap when somebody else is paying for it. It's really easy. And it's, tends to be very dishonest. It's the simple truth. You can't trust somebody who's describing somebody else's experience when it's to their advantage to minimize what that experience is and tell them that it's no big deal. So essentially the procreators are telling people like me who find death an ominously horrid prospect that it's no big deal. That becoming diable, that is becoming in such a state that if you don't jump in front of a car, you're just going to hope that the disease itself kills you quickly. You're begging for it, essentially. That there's something I'm going to do in my life that's going to make that trauma, whatever it's going to be, however I'm going to be murdered, worth it. And so procreators are basically saying to their kids, I've had you so you can be a murder victim. You're going to be a murder victim. Okay, it doesn't really matter whether a psychopath kills you, because it's going to be just as bad. Okay, the knife the lunatic is going to stick in your throat isn't going to be any worse than the cancer nature is going to stick in your head. You're going to be killed, and there's every prospect it's going to be quite horrible, and it'll take months to get the job done. And that's my gift to you, because I've done the math, and I figured out that your happy meals are going to be worth it. So the little moments you might have in your existence where you feel just wonderful are somehow going to pay. They'd be worth the price. You're going to be so happy to have your happy moments that you're going to be perfectly willing to be tortured for 7 or 8 months. Plus all the other little tortures of your divorces and all the other crap that's going to happen in your life, the shitty jobs and the health problems, and 50% of the population ends up disabled by the time they're 50 years old. In some form or another. Hardly a free ride, hardly a gift. So that's the substance of the argument, is what's in the head of somebody who's deciding they're doing somebody a favor by thrusting them into existence, when the fact is they're going to be a murder victim. They won't have any, there's no other option. That's all, that's already a written fact, that's what's going to happen to that individual. It's going to have to face disease. It's going to have to face death as a possibility. Anyway, I mean, obviously you can be killed without ever seeing it coming. Somebody can fire their gun a mile away from here, and the bullet comes through the window here and bounces off that ledge and hits me in the brain. And sometimes you're lucky. But that's all that is good fortune. So there's a lot to talk about. I mean, there's a lot of little subjects all mixed in to this idea, but it's just a simple prospect of doing the calculation. You're just saying, what are the things I'm really adding up? And then you just pull the lever, and it produces the outcome that says, yes, 10 pains today is worth preventing 20 pains tomorrow. And it's just a fact. If I can prevent 20 pains tomorrow by doing 10 today, well, that's a bargain, and you got to buy it. You say, oh, yep, no choice. Got to take it. Got to grab the opportunity while it's knocking. And a bunch of utilitarians just don't see that logic. They just pretend I don't have to be logical. I'll just construct a some sort of other framework, some sort of religious framework about what reality is, and I won't pay any attention to the fact that sometimes your choices are going to suck. It's just a fact. You either have 20 people suffering or you have 10 people suffering. That's your choice. Both choices suck. Okay, there's no choice that's going to show up where nobody suffers and the 20 are prevented. Those are rare and difficult to find. Okay, that's the whatever, the 5-leaf clover. So you have to accept what's available as bargains, because you're not going to get the everything's for free sale. The stores don't run that sale. So you know, it's just pragmatic and sensible and reasonable to recognize that if they present you with the opportunity, you know, to prevent the net 10 harms, then you grab it because it's net 10. But yeah, it sounds ugly. Sounds ugly to say it would be worth it to kill one person, let's say, just randomly in America, to cure malaria. Well, you can't deny the numbers. I mean, the amount of harm you're preventing is gigantic. Yes, the amount of death is still the same. Every one of them's still going to die, but they're going to live a lot better. They're going to have less bad moments, less horrible suffering is going to be endured by human brains. And it cost you almost nothing, in the sense that if you kill him quickly, you didn't even do him any harm. So you do like almost no harm, and you know, you get millions and millions of people relieved of their fetters and their negative conditions. Their life becomes very much more positive than it was. Now, obviously, the point's going to be it becomes less negative, you know, but you know, still giving the other side the benefit of the doubt, you're still arguing it's a huge gain, and only an idiot would say you don't take advantage of that huge opportunity to gain a huge amount of elevated condition in value. You're rescuing value. It's like, you know, saving people in a war or doing any. It's just, the fact is, you will save the conscious experience as a universal event. You will save that a huge amount of negative. You'll take a bunch of negative out of the bag that is what is consciousness doing in the universe, and you'll make it less bloody. You'll make it less bad. So then I say it's 2 people you got to kill. Then I say it's 4, and then I say it's 50, and then I say it's 5 million. The fact is it's still a bargain. So, yeah, you know, you just have to, you know, is there any logic? Is there any other way to pull the lever on the adding machine and come up with a different result? Then, yeah, it's still a bargain, you know. And you have to take bargains where they come. And if you don't, you're just, frankly, you're forcing people to stay in a torture and a torment that didn't need to take place. You're making the world you're making existence in the universe less positive, okay, by rejecting a perfectly good deal that would have made it less negative. It's a fact. So anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to emphasize. But there's so much more in this subject of what it is to be an efficiencyist or a reasonable person trying to live their life, trying to negotiate a function in their life that is positive, trying to do good in the world. So I guess that's sort of the subject too. How do we use our calculating brain to do good? And I'd say the best way you can use your calculating brain to do good is to sit there and maybe compile all the bargains that we should be taking, you know, and the bargain of maybe even the fascism of telling people they can't be too stupid anymore. You know, it's just a nice luxury to think, oh, we can be multicultural and we can say we don't have to have any hard standards about function, and you can be sloppy and messy. But the fact is that, causes all kinds of catastrophic end product, and all of that needs to be practically prevented or discouraged, at least, at minimum. And so that goes right to the whole argument about, how reckless we can be about having kids and what's your responsibility. And the responsibility has to be learned very young, that you don't have a right to have kids and force somebody else to pay for them. I mean, that's kind of disgusting. And it's really bad when there's every prospect that the experiment won't work, that even if society pays for it, the product, the child raised by the child, isn't going to be enough of a human being. It's not going to calculate properly. It's going to be inept and incompetent to live in civilization, in any kind of profitable way to the civilization. It's not going to be making good decisions. It's not going to do good calculations, and so it's not going to be a benefit to society in any way. It's going to be a liability that's going to cause things to suffer unnecessarily. People have to do more work, or it'll put people in real risk, and it won't do anybody any good. Welfare whoring is just not acceptable behavior, and it should be well understood that it's not acceptable. People fathering children, without taking responsibility, all of that stuff has to be in some sort of harsh way. It has to be made clear that you can't keep doing it, because it's such a degrade in the function of society, because you're not going to make a smart Frankenstein. You're going to make the monstrosity Stein. You're going to make the dumb Stein. And the world just doesn't need dumb Steins. We don't have a shortage of them. It's like having a shortage of mosquitoes. We don't, dumb people are a blight. They're a parasite. They're a leech, on the function of civilization. And civilization is the only way to be able to make our individual calculations and our knowledge of the rightness of some action and turn it into a reality. The only way we can do that is as a collective, and we have to do it through the civilization. And if we have an idiocracy, well, that's not going to happen. The civilization has to have integrity. It has to be smart. And if all we have is stupid people electing stupid, well, then we're not going to have the smart civilization that's necessary to do the utilitarian thing, the right thing, to do the sensible thing, and make less victims, and create, and to prevent, even if you're a positive utilitarian, do things that prevent maximizing our experience as happy creatures, because the degrade will do both. It will cause more harm, and it will prevent more bliss. So I'm not totally unsatisfied with that as a start, so maybe I'll end there and continue later, when I can pick a piece of this to play with. But anyway, it's really, I mean, as you start to try to organize the ideas, right? I mean, the ideas is that, yes, it's a battlefield of ideas, which reminds me that No Brains in Head, I don't remember what his channel name is. Well, anyway, he lost his channel, which seemed excessive. I don't know what he did, but anyway, he's got a new channel, and he's posting articulate statements, about opposition opinion. Essentially right now he's just kind of critiquing how lame and pointless the opposition's arguments are, because none of them are actually on the actual subjects. But anyway, so he used that phrase, the battlefield of ideas. I use it a lot, but anyway, the value landscape as now I'm going to forget his name. Amazing. Yeah, it's just gone. Gone. It's just in my head. And now it's gone. So I have no names in my head. Yeah, there's no names in my head. Oh, that's just so funny. I mean, it was really right in my head. I mean, well, anyway. So the guy wrote the book, and he's an asshole, had kids, and he argued against Benatar's arguments. And you're just saying, how can you write a book that's pretty coherent about the fact that there is this obvious value to experience, and that's what we're really playing for, is experiences, and not recognize that there's a giant pool of experiences that are just so bad, okay, you would sacrifice all of your happy meals to avoid them. I mean, it's just, as a practical fact, yes, that's what you would do. Because they're just that bad, and there's all kinds of outcomes that are just quite horrid. And now maybe some elitist who doesn't think he's going to be subjected to, like, he's not going to get Lyme disease because he's not in the field working, and he's not going to be subjected to having his arm hacked off by a machete because he's not handling machetes, and so maybe he thinks he's immune, and so therefore he can make some proclamation that he's winning. But you don't have to look at human society, and it's not hard to see all of the people living just miserable lives, survival lives only, very poor quality, and all kinds of neurotic stuff going on, all kinds of people tormented by all kinds of stuff, all kinds of people depressed by all kinds of stuff, all kinds of people who need to drink or to take drugs or to be medicated in some way or another just to get through their days. I mean, it's just impossible to think, how could somebody see that and say, oh yeah, there's a good prospect that my kids will be immune. That none of these things will happen to them. None of these misadventures. I mean, just too ridiculous. None of the bad luck, the bad, genetic code luck, the bad exposure to the wrong chemical at the wrong time thing. I mean, So a man who writes a book basically about utilitarianism and recognizing that value is real because it's right here in front of us in terms of our conscious experience, and he doesn't know how to add 2 plus 2. I mean, he can't do, his calculator is completely useless because it can't add up the numbers right at all. It can't make a reasonable calculation, and yet he describes it. He can describe how bad it would be to have some disease that you're vomiting every 3 minutes, and there's all kinds of pain and suffering and horror. He figures out that that's bad, but somehow he thinks there's some real good that fixes that. Like if you write an opera or something, that somehow you've made up for it. It's all okay. A little piece of music is all. You pet the puppy, and that's worth hours of torment. I mean, it's just ridiculous calculations. So this is the problem. Like, even if you get people to acknowledge what has value, they still have to be able to add it right. And that's the scary part is, people can't even do that part. Say, let's just call it honestly, and recognize that they wouldn't pay the price. If they had to pay the price, they wouldn't pay it. If dying slowly of the plague was the price of being something in England in 1758 or something, I'd say no, thank you. It's quite logical to say yes, no. I don't want to be one of the price payers. Oh, now if I can be the guy sitting out in the country talking about apples falling from trees, oh, okay, well, that's a good deal. But if I have to be one of the people that dies of the plague, well, no, that's not a good deal. And not even close. So, all right. Well, now I'll say I'm done for now. I'll be back later and such, so forth and whatnot. Yeah, I think I'm done for now. All right, back. As I mentioned earlier, No Brains in Head is now Antinatalist Broadcast Network, ABN. And he uses AI, which, you know, I'm, you know, it's inevitable. But I don't like how exquisite it is at producing propaganda. You know, so it's, you know, it's you know, you can just use it for that purpose, is to create the perfect piece of, you know, manufactured crap, you know, in terms of motivating people. And this is a, you know, a perfect piece of crap. This, you know, this video we made is 30 minutes. It's just a great rant on the subject of antinatalism and effalism. And, you know, so, you know, hats off in terms of, you know, it's not a book, but it's a pretty good pamphlet. And, you know, the voice is perfect from a cartoon. And, you know, even the cartoon has some elements that are interesting in the fact that the cartoon was about, you know, a couple of laboratory mice, and, you know, that's kind of tragic. And their effort to, you know, escape, essentially. Take over the world, escape, same difference. And they're always, you know, the plan was always destroyed by the retarded Australian mouse. Seemed Australian. So, so yeah, so that fits. But anyway, just a side note. Just something it reminded me of. It was just funny. So yeah, so I don't know what to say about, you know, it's just, AI is very powerful at, you know, manipulating us, and it's a powerful tool. But you know, the arguments are the arguments, and you still have to do your reasoning, and you have to take your responsibility for knowing when you're being snookered. And I see that a lot in the arguments I'm making in physics. You know, all the production videos where they spend all the money to do animations and all this crap, and you know, they make it all look like it makes sense, but, you know, it's just, they just gloss over all the huge giant defects in the theory. And so maybe I'll play a little clip from one of my videos. It's just kind of funny. So I'll just play that because it's a little bit funny. But anyway, you should subscribe, because it's obviously, it's usually content relevant, and you know, he has spent a great deal of time trying to interact with the trolls, and I don't know how fruitful that is, or how, you know, whether there's ever a point, you know, whether they will ever put any facts together in any fair manner ever. So I don't know if there's any point, but whatever. He has extended a great deal of effort, even sort of defending accusations made against me. But the accusations are so evil and untrue that, you know, they almost shouldn't be defended, because they're just so untrue. I mean, they're just so absent anything called facts or evidence. So, alright, so that's enough of that, and I'll go find the other little clip. It's like, this is like a, yeah, this is an infomercial in the middle of the video, or something like that. Alright, I should be back, so we'll just play this little clip. Humans. I mean, I wish there were aliens I could go testify against you at the human trial. You know, I just wish I could just point out what lying scum you are. The aliens, yes, go ahead, eat them. Doesn't matter what you do to them, because they deserve it. They hate intelligence. They hate neurons. They hate having brains. They don't want to use one reasonably and rationally. They just want to sit in their fucking own poo, you know, and squeeze it all day. Anyway, struck me as funny. Anyway, yes, that's the real problem here. It isn't that the argument is all that complicated in terms of just explaining how, you know, life is kind of serious business. There's torture at risk, and some of it's inevitable, and there's really not much we can do here except struggle with maintaining a condition that is as untorturous as possible. So we're just swimming in a very negative condition, and there's really nothing positive to cling to. There's just negative things to push on, to try to keep yourself out of harm's way. And there's nothing to do to the universe. There's nothing we can puncture or grab or do anything to that the universe needs us to do, because nothing else can do it. There's no keyhole that needs the human key to unlock the beautiful, magical wonderland. There is no such place, and we don't have any keys and all of that. So anyway, that's sort of back to the subject. So that's where I'll get back to the subject. I'll go look at my notes and see where I'm supposed to be in this video. Yes, I'll see where I'm supposed to be by now, where I would have been. But anyway, be back. All right, should be back. So, notes, kind of a mess. And, I came to the conclusion, you write a few things, a few sentences, and you say, oh, well, the problem is people aren't really playing by the rules of, being good robots, being good calculators. It should be facts in and brilliant, conclusions out, and they're really not doing that. Homies don't play that, and they're basically just living in simple stories, little fables of reality. Especially the God botherers, and there's no connection. It's not a, their fable doesn't have any connection to reality. And so it's just a story, and a story based on what means something to Hoobies or Smurfs or whatever fake world they're living in. And there's no Smurf berries. There's nothing here in this reality, and that's the substance of the problem in making these arguments, I guess, is just that people are too perverse in how they have allowed their machine to calculate. And so it's like the whole multiplication table has been distorted and perverted, and so they've memorized all the wrong numbers, and it's all a bunch of bad math that they're doing in terms of, recognizing and seeing what game they're really playing. And so, I can boil that down in another way by just saying, well, their brain could be, useful, but it's too driven by scheming, too driven by figuring out how they win in whatever judgment they make. Is how does the outcome affect them, and that's first, and then having the outcome be actually a good thing is tangential. It's some other element, but it isn't the direct purpose in thinking. Isn't to create the best outcome for everybody. It's to first create the best outcome from the person doing the thinking. And obviously that's something you could argue is corrupting. And I would argue that none of us can evade that. I do it too, but the whole point is to try to minimize how much you're calculating, in your own interest, and how much you're really trying to find the best solution for the answer of what do I do? What's my role here? What should I believe is a good investment of my time and energy? And existence. And so, most people aren't even, they're not even close to being able to do that kind of thinking. They're just too caught up going to grandma's house, with their basket and their little red hat. So anyway, so you can talk about, how there's certain values that you can figure out pretty easy, that doesn't matter whether there's pain in my brain or it's pain in another brain. It just means that there's pain, and you want to try to minimize how much of that happens in the sphere of sentient organism. And that's a pretty simple statement. Maybe most people could say, oh yeah, in principle, that's well, I believe that would be a good thing to do, is, minimize the number of broken legs. Yeah, it's a good idea. But that's as far as it goes, right? Because as soon as you say they have to give up a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for the cause, they won't give it up. So the me first thing kicks in, and just breaks any kind of notion that that's the game we're going to play. So the idea is you just have a brain. It can do this thinking thing. It can do it very well. That's really it can process information and draw conclusions and predictions about outcomes that are really quite good. So it's capable of doing good, in the world, and we use it badly, you could argue. And I would point my statement and say, you people, or the average person, or most humans, use it badly. And the corruption is false narratives, believing in things that don't exist, fairies and pixies and hobgoblins and Jesus and gods. Big mistake. That'll make a mess out of your brain, because none of those stories about locations like heaven and hell, they're not real locations. They're not real places. There's not real meetups in heaven, where you all have fun pizza or something, as you watch all the rubies and and diamonds glitter, because that's important, that you're entertained while you wait in line to kiss the Lord's ring. Even that, there's so many people who think it's fun to just spend all day praising the Lord, praising the Lord. That's a pretty kinky thing to enjoy. But anyway, maybe it's a matter of taste. But anyway, so you can talk about getting these weights and measures right. How long is a meter, and how much does a kilogram weigh, and arguing. But that's basically what we're saying. I'm saying that a little lion cub's welfare is important, and if you just do the simple math that you have to kill horribly 10 of them to have an adult lion, well, that's too expensive. So until you get that cost way down, and I mean way down, you can't make any sense out of making lions. And so it's the same is true for all things that exist. If you have to pay too much, in the sense that too much has to be paid to have them, then you don't bother having them, because the simple truth is you can't make an argument defending the need for them. Brontosauruses and Tyrannosauruses are only being missed in a very superficial way by us, because we can draw pictures of them and imagine them and call one Sparky or something and say, gee, I wish Sparky was alive, but there's nothing real. I mean, there's no universal deficit, because a bunch of animals that we don't even know existed, and they don't exist anymore. We're not missing them. The universe isn't missing them. It's just silly to say they needed to exist. Just to sit around, wait to be killed. Because that's pretty much what being alive is you sit around and wait to be killed. Yeah, you might move around a little bit while you're sitting around, so I don't want to imply you don't do anything, but, melting crayons on the street, or, you know, daydreaming about, some sort of conquest you're going to have and some kind of great adventure, that's just bullshit, frankly. What you're really doing is just waiting to be killed. Horribly, probably. Most likely, horribly. What the hell did I write there? Well, maybe I'll pause to see what I wrote. Right, kind of getting back to the beginning with the battlefield of ideas kind of point. It's really a, in this practical sense, a battlefield of stories or narratives, assertions about what book we're in. What's the, is it the 100-acre wood, or, is it Smurftown? What's the character, of the stuff we're interacting with, and that's a little more of a, it's not a very catchy phrase, so you say battlefield of ideas, concepts, notions of reality, statements, assertions about what the truth is, and that's what we're arguing, because a lot of people wish to assert that there is a function that we provide, and that function is to serve and entertain a God, apparently, so he can feel proud of us because we didn't cheat on our wife or some trivial nonsense. And but we obeyed all the other rules, which were go ahead, kill shit to smear its blood on your doorway to prevent some sort of smiting that God feels like doing now and then. Now and then God will smite the bad guys, and you have to make yourself a blood shield to protect yourself. Well, that's the story. Okay, I didn't make it up. They did. I wish I could describe a more reasonable story they were telling, but I can't, because their story is what it is, nonsense and silly. So anyway, and the truth is that no, we evolved here, and these other mammals are just different versions of us, and they have strengths and weaknesses that are different than ours, and ours is the fact that we can do this abstract thinking, if you want to call it that. The real key point is the language thing. The language thing gives us the capacity to share our ideas. Okay, when somebody has a better idea, they could call water some other silly word, some multi-syllabic giant word, and you think, nah, water's just so much easier. Let's go with water. And wet. Water is wet. It's really easy. So we just negotiate a way of describing the world and understanding it. And, people make arguments that, okay, there's 5 elements or 17 elements. There's earth, fire, mud, poo. They could make up lots of other stuff, and then, we can do some scientific experiments and break it down into, well, no, there's really just atoms, and yes, there's 100 of them, but, we only really interact with these 6 or 7 that are important, and, that kind of thing. And so we're just in that process, and frankly, it's pretty much that arguing for this kind of unpleasant truth, that it's a bug planet, and we're just role playing for a DNA molecule. We're just being disposable demonstration models. We're just here to sell the winners. The losers just exist to kind of sell the winners. To propel them into another round, to be stood upon and trampled upon to get to this thing called tomorrow. And it's all kind of insidious and horrible, and that's unpleasant. I mean, it's nasty that the truth happens to be a nasty story. I'm sorry. But frankly, it's just calculation. It's the only way you can add the facts up and be honest to them is to recognize that the facts are all negative. You know, it's a sad story full of horror and torment and torture. And you were lucky in the sense that this one version of consciousness, didn't have to experience all that personally. But the fact is, whether you experience it personally doesn't matter. It's being experienced. That's the part that matters. That's the part you have to recognize, is that even if you're having a good time, it doesn't mean all the other sentient creatures are. And that's easy to know. And you have to recognize that you have to blend your little positive with all of that sea of negative. And that's your obligation. And it's not going to be a good time, to be fair to those facts. Every moment on Earth, there's events happening to sentient brains, and it's no different than if it was your brain experiencing it, and it's very, very nasty and unpleasant and bad. And you have to account for that if you're going to defend existing and playing life. And that they don't want to do. They won't do, because they can't do it. Really, they can't. I think they know they can't. And so they have to make up a different story. They have to pretend that life isn't what it, logically boils down to, and that there's some other story here of, going through the wormhole to the singularity or something, where everything's going to be all right, and somehow all of the horror will be somehow redeemed as a good investment, because so much good will be accomplished by the existence of the calculating machines sitting around waiting to die. So yes, it seems plausible that there'll be some day where it won't be sitting around waiting to die, because it'll be taking its rejuvenating medication, and it will be able to maintain itself in some non-degrading or less degrading form, and but that's going to be a long wait, and it's going to be incremental, because different parts of you are dying for different reasons. They're wearing out for different reasons. So, one pill isn't going to fix everything. And so, and again, then what's the difference? You're not going to be treading the fear water of death, but you're still going to lack anything to really go forward for, because everything's going to get redundant, and it's going to, there's not going to be any, it's just like playing the same card game over and over and over forever, and eventually you're going to say, that's not good enough. Something like that. Yeah, probably. Anyway, I'll take a moment to reconsider and see where I can pull out of this. I mean, the whole argument is that, I'm really not going to be arguing with somebody capable of understanding the argument, so I have to start at some other position where I make them capable of arguing the argument before I can have the argument. You have to make the person capable of having the argument, and part of that is, they really can't have in the back of their head that, well, everything you're saying is bullshit because God says, and no, that's not going to work. If that's always lingering in the background, there's no point, because you'll never take any of it seriously. Something like that. Alright, so I'm just thinking some way to sum it up, like people don't see things the way things are. That's a simple accusation to make. clearly it explains all these diverse perceptions. That it's all just little distortions, or catastrophically huge, monstrous distortions. That we're all looking through, some kind of material. Yeah, and depending on the angle it's at, or all kinds of things, it can look all kinds of scary things. Or you can turn something ugly into something whatever. And just the way people just even see each other, what they define as attractive or intriguing or stimulating or whatever, triggering. And if we could actually see, inside of people, just see the function, see the little cancer growing, see the facts of our existence, what drives us and what makes us us. Even that would, as an imagined world, it would be quite interesting if we could just, look at somebody like Mr. Spock or something, and we wouldn't even have to mind meld with any kind of physical contact, and we could just, steal their perception and say, see how the wheels are turning in their head and what's, giving them a boner, so to speak. That would be so enlightening in terms of being able to communicate with each other, because you could just say, wow, it's just really bizarre that you find that edible, so I run into that with I sit outside a lot, at least partially exposed to the external world, and I have to have mosquito barriers and whatnot, but anyway, you hear what music people are playing and stuff, and you're like, how could that in any way be a pleasant experience? You just I just find it unimaginable, and especially at the volume they're playing it at. I mean, it's just how the hell would I want to stick my head in that washing machine, or whatever that. I mean, it just doesn't seem like there's anything that could possibly happen to your brain, ingesting that crap and noise and shit talk, that could do anything productive. Yeah, certainly stimulate a positive or hopeful or even useful or motivating thought or emotion. Just can't see it, can't find it. Especially, I guess, just because for me, music was something, it was sort of therapeutic. It was, it was, the whole idea was to calm and relax and in some ways reassure, make you feel better, so usually it had something, something a little sad, a little, blah, 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 but, something that would just trigger some notion that you're not alone in the world, or not unappreciable, or that kind of thing. Anyway, and you just don't hear any of that in anything I hear on the street ever. It's like nobody. It's like you never hear anything. I would argue is good for a brain. But anyway, there must be, because these people live on it. They drink it, and somehow it, like Gatorade or something, it does something for them. So just a fact, they find food value. So that would be enlightening and constructive if that were possible, to be able to see why people are what they are. Like in my trolls, it'd be really great to just see what they're thinking. What's the calculation? How what the hell are they thinking? To build this nonsense narrative to try to make me into some sort of Dr. Evil. no, it's what? Yeah, no, I know what the hell are you talking about? Um, it just means it's such a false narrative. I mean, I've done nothing on the internet but fight for causes, and the causes are always victims that aren't me. Except maybe the cigarette thing. I was a player there. I had a stake in the outcome, so that was you could argue that was a self-interested, self-motivated crusade. But again, I think that would be a superficial appraisal of the circumstance, just because the fact is I knew the principle really mattered. Because if you give away the ground here, it's that take a mile. Give them too many inches, and you're going to start losing miles. And it's turned out to be absolutely true that everything's turned to shit because we let it go a little bit, and you let it go a little bit, and it's all of a sudden gone a lot of it, and you don't have anything left that's usable or fertile. Yeah, that's sort of a good point, I think. Anyway, so so another video where I'm just playing with the narrative. The idea, I was thinking of redesigning the websites, and they could use some updating. I mean, the F list is okay, the just maybe the shape of it, because the currency of the videos, which ones I'm making now, is lost a little bit of its usefulness, and what it really needs to be is videos on subjects. And the subjects aren't as easy. In physics it's sort of easy to just outline force versus matter versus and then you can just go through this idea of what you're there's identifiable subjects. And it's a little harder to find the identifiable subjects in talking about this truth narrative about our existence. You can say the word robot, you can say the word bug planet, you can, say different things, and you can reduce that to evolution versus any other notion of our origin, and, recognize that it makes monstrosities. It doesn't, it's not perfecting something by some standards. It's just creating tool-enabled organisms. And it just happens that our scheming tool can be used as a thinking tool. That is, it can scheme for an individual, or it can scheme for a family, or it can scheme for a nation, or it can scheme for a human race, or it can scheme for all of sentient life on planet Earth. And that's the truth. And the argument is that obviously it should understand that yes, it should be scheming for all the players that have put their anti-money into the game, that have a stake in the game, that have a piece of flesh in the game, and everything sentient has paid its dues, so to speak. It is a stakeholder, and it should be included in any scheming you're doing. Its welfare should matter. And just doing that, just recognizing that whatever your plan is, okay, you have to account for, I've called it an environmental impact statement. You have to be able to make your environmental impact statement and point out how your plan isn't going to create a wasteland, or isn't going to a torture land is probably a better statement. Wastelands are probably okay. It's the torture lands that are bad. Alright, so that's probably enough of a video. So, so if somebody has a video somewhere where somebody's making some counter argument in some kind of form, or even another Benatar interview or something else that they'd like me to respond to, then provide a link, blah blah blah. And because I suppose that's at least it's more direct to have some contact with whatever the counter argument is. Now, the fact is that most of these arguments aren't among believers in evolution against religious people, and that's kind of surprising that the religious people aren't the ones, doing most of the arguing against this philosophy that says this whole thing is best prevented. And it's somehow people who don't have that narrative but have some hope narrative, some kind of narrative that there's some point in human beings, whatever, infecting the universe with their their experiential narratives of success and accomplishment, whatever that is. And again, the accomplishment usually is just trying not to be miserable, and such. I mean, you spend a lot of time doing that. Yeah, trying not to be miserable. So anyway, yeah, so that's enough. Yeah, enough. Okay, so till the next time, and such, and so forth, and whatnot. It's a video. Mostly consistent with the other videos I have made, so yeah. Pretty much. Close enough.